Again, thank you everyone who is joining us today. Good morning. I am Jahan Casey. I am a member of the Ditidaht Indian Band from the beautiful Haida Gwaii, but I'm gratefully speaking to you right now from the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Nations. And again, thank you everyone for being here for our Webinar Wednesday, brought to you by the First Nations Public Service Secretariat on managing food security amidst a pandemic. And we have a fantastic panel for you. Two individuals from working in First Nations in BC and an individual from Indigenous Services Canada to share their expertise. This is part of our Webinar Wednesday program through our mentorship initiative at the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, where we are committed to sharing knowledge and expertise and experiences amongst First Nations in BC. So if you haven't gone to our website yet, there's a number of tools, information. There will be information about this after. That's FNPSS.ca. And also we have a Facebook group of First Nations Administrators Network where there's additional information and where these individuals and others will share information and experiences. So without going on anymore, I think we've got pretty much everyone coming in. A couple of logistical items. We are recording and we'll be sharing this across social media. So anyone who misses it, or if you have colleagues you want to share it with, feel free. Also, there is, for participants who have joined, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button and a chat button. Please submit your questions through the Q&A. And we will make sure that our panelists answer them as we get through the webinar. We've got about 45 minutes, so please type them in and pop into the chat if you want and let us know who you are and what where you're from and what you want to learn from this webinar. Also, one of my colleagues, Bronwyn Geddes, is in the background. You can't see her on the screen right now, but she will be answering questions in the chat if there's anything that requires a web address or additional information. So you'll see her pop up in the chat too, answering questions. So I am going to go ahead and introduce our panelists now and get into this topic that we are here to share today. So with me today, I'm so pleased to have Jeneen Hunt, who is the Executive Director of Ditidaht First Nation. We also have Atleo, the Manager of Administration with Ahousaht. And last but not least, Milica Nauman, who is currently managing a food security team with Indigenous Services Canada, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that team shortly. So I'm gonna let each of our panelists provide a few comments, and then we'll go to questions. And again, I encourage you to please put your questions in the Q&A. So Janine, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for sharing today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeneen Hunt. So Samtana is my name. My parents are from Cowichan tribes, and I'm married into the Kwaguk band. I've had the privilege to work for Ditidaht First Nation for the last 18 months as the Executive Director, and recently as the Community Service Manager and the Emergency Operations Center Operations Chief. With the food security and the COVID-19, what we did was we had some money put aside for our food fish crew. We had a member actually volunteer his time and go get some food fish right away when it first started. We worked with DFN partners in getting some food sources, and we've had weekly food distribution since the beginning of COVID-19. And that was to help reduce the time that our members are traveling into town. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hour dirt road drive to Port Alberni or to Duncan. So it was, the whole idea is keeping our community safe and keeping them home during this time. I'd like to thank our Chief and Council, all of our staff, the treaty team, Jack Thompson and Robert Joseph, and our members for all working together during this difficult time and doing what we needed to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you again to all of your community for what you are doing and for sharing. I'm going to ask Anne to step on here and provide a little bit of information about herself and what her community is doing.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Atleo. Classish Haikwe Tuxish Ahousaht. I work as manager of administration and have had several different positions with the Ahousaht. Just some background information. I currently, with my 18-year-old daughter, we take care of the oldest member of Ahousaht, who happens to be my mom. She's 91 years old. We have a village of about 900 to 1,000 people. We live on an island away from Vancouver Island. It's about a 35, 40-minute boat ride. So with always in mind, we're remote, that we always have to consider food security. And during this COVID crisis, we set up our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, before the pandemic was declared, or the state of emergency was declared in BC. We were about a week ahead of them. We also began making arrangements to open up a food bank. The Deputy Chief Councillor, Milica Nauman, has the mandate to take care of local matters, and she has oversight over our food bank. And then what happens is they order bulk food. She has 2 teams that come in. They deliver the food by barge. We have worked with our partners within the region, and they help us with covering freight costs and help us with having a place for the food to be delivered in Tofino. We quickly made application to ISC and the MBC to secure funding to cover food costs. We also had, on March 13th, as a community, restricted travel into the village. And we asked for our members to leave the village only for essential services. So to also minimize travel in and out of the village, we opened the food bank with that in mind. And every day at 4 o'clock after our 2 o'clock meeting, our chief counselor and our director of EOC do a daily update on Facebook Live. And they always say the food bank is open. Part of that was that they stressed that the food that was going to be distributed was going to be for the essentials, whether the essentials were food items or personal items for all ages, and then items for those people that have special diets. And the community members also set out to do food harvesting. There was some funds set aside by our hereditary chiefs, our Hutway, and they tasked people with going out fishing and harvesting different types of seafood. Our fisheries department also took the lead in harvesting shellfish and prawns and crabs and that. So Melinda's team had oversight and distribution. Also made arrangements to have food delivered to our community members that live away from home. There's about 2,100 Ahousaht registered members. And we connected with our urban members. We have urban council members, and they gathered the addresses and names of people. And another team was tasked with distributing gift cards so that they could also purchase food as they needed. And they were also tasked with being able to distribute some of the seafood that was sent out. We also purchased some canned fish from St. Jean's and distributed that, since we couldn't always distribute fresh seafood to the urban members. The other part was, because food security has the 5 A's: availability, accessibility, adequacy, acceptability, and agency. We also have seen over the years, we participated in First Nations gardening program. And this year we have over probably close to 30 people that are gardening, have their own vegetable gardens, their own berry areas, and their own fruit-bearing trees now in and around their homes. And those that aren't able to garden on the ground have begun container gardening. So it's been really amazing to see all of this coming together, and we're quite happy with the results. There's a lot of logistics involved: ordering, freight, weekly food distribution, practicing safe distancing, ensuring that our crew that's working in the food bank has all of the proper personal protective equipment, face shields, masks, gloves, etc. So there's a lot of logistics involved, and we really appreciate all of the efforts of our team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And it was pointed out to me that I thank Janine by calling her Melissa. I can't type and click at the same time. Retroactively, thank you, Janine. I am now, though, going to ask Melissa to provide a few comments on her role with and her team with ISK. And please type your questions in the Q&A. I see some coming in, and we will answer them after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jehan, and thank you for hosting this great meeting. I just want to begin by acknowledging that I'm calling in from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And it's great to be here to try to provide a little bit of information, help answer any questions, but then also hear from you, all of the participants, what food security needs are still out there and what needs to be done. So as Jehan mentioned, I am leading a small, very small food security team. It's just myself and my colleague Shannon Gander, who I think is in the meeting as well. And we were asked by senior management at the start of the COVID emergency to look at food security, because we know it is a very significant concern for everybody, but especially First Nation communities who are remote and small and may not have a lot of capacity to bring in a lot of food for their members, and also really want to keep their members safe from any exposure. So what we've been doing is supporting communities in terms of funding by providing advice on how certain allocations that ISK has made, such as the Indigenous Community Support Fund and the Emergency Management Supplement that went right away, how that can be used to supplement food and other necessities for First Nation communities and members. Traditionally, ISK doesn't have a food security program, but there has been added flexibility during this emergency to use those sources of funds to particularly support bringing in food, setting up small food banks, buying any necessities for particularly those most vulnerable members, such as the elderly or people who may have medical issues that make it challenging for them to travel. And I think our other participants, Anne and Janine, provided some amazing examples of what's been done at the community level. So our role at ISK has really been trying to facilitate that as much as possible and kind of get out of the way when they have a good handle on it, but also support where communities may need more help. So what we've created a lot of linkages with provincial ministries, but also organizations and even the private sector to help with supply chain. There's quite a few companies that have said that, that they're willing to go any distance to help deliver food to communities. So if you need contacts in those areas, we can definitely try to provide that. The federal government has also invested a lot into food banks, both nationally and then locally, including Food Banks BC, Second Harvest, a number of organizations who are providing support for both First Nations, but then also members or Indigenous individuals off reserve, which we know is a significant concern for a lot of our community. And then additional support has been provided to a number of industries, to farmers, to fishermen, that really allow the industry to kind of not only sustain itself, but also ensure the food supply is not made vulnerable, because I think that's been a concern for everybody. The last thing I'll just touch on broadly is that we have a lot of tools and resources that have been developed over the last 2 months, but also leveraging things that have been out there before. I'll cite a couple, and you can always get in touch with us to either access these tools or find out more. One thing that's been done by the First Nations Health Authority is an amazing food security planning tool that they've put together. It's kind of like a 17-page workbook that allows communities or individuals to kind of plan out what their needs may be, and touches on a lot of things that Anne talked about. And then in the back, it also has about a dozen resources of where you could go to get either funding to set up your food bank or community garden, or different supports to support individuals. I mentioned that there is a supply chain working group provincially. If you are having trouble getting food into your community, there's definitely companies like Cisco and others who want to help bring that in and are willing to go that distance. And there's also been work with actually grocery stores in communities. We know that there's been instances where community members or First Nations want to do bulk purchases, but there may be limits on certain items in grocery stores. So there's been guidance provided to the large grocery chains to not prohibit First Nation communities, for example, for buying in bulk, because they may only make a trip out once a week or once every 2 weeks. So there are, template letters and things, tools that have been created that would help facilitate that and not kind of have any awkward situations at the grocery store. So there's been a number of things done both on a large scale and on a smaller scale to really make this tough situation try to remedy it as much as possible. We know that everybody is still having a challenging times, and the food is an important part of that. But we're here to help. So if you do have specific circumstances, you are welcome to raise it today, but also feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can see what from within our resource lines and contacts we can do to help you and your community out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And I'm just going to bring all of our panelists back on live here, and we can go through some questions because we have a number of questions coming in. So I appreciate all of those initial comments. I have a number, but I'm going to start with actually just reading out, and maybe I'll ask Anne for you to answer since it was already in the chat. Right off the bat, someone wants to know if you can repeat the 5 A's again.
The 5 A's for food security?
Yes.
Availability. How readily available is the food? Accessibility. How easily can you access the food? Adequacy. Is there a sufficient amount of food? Acceptability. Is it food that is culturally acceptable to you, your family? And agency. Who is helping to, what policies are in place to ensure that, what is making it happen? How are you helping your community? And what other agencies are you working with to see this happen?
Thank you. I think that's great. And I noticed Bronwyn has typed that in the chat too. So if anyone was scribbling that down, we'll also share information and reshare the link to all participants from this. So if you didn't manage to take notes, you can copy it down again. I'm going to go through some of the other questions from participants again. So someone has asked here if you know of any funding opportunities to help First Nation communities in regards to greenhouses and planting their own food for their communities. Perhaps I could turn it over to either Anne or Janine if you've accessed any funding, or Melissa if you know of any from the government.
Any funding for food sources, we haven't reached out to anything in that way at all.
Melissa, maybe I could ask you to speak to that. Do you know if there's any funding opportunities available for greenhouses or planting gardens in First Nations?
I think there are, and it may be in, I think I saw some references to it in that FNHA planning guide. But I have heard that there are foundations in British Columbia that do support community garden projects and even certain municipalities. So I could add that perhaps to the one pager that we're developing with you guys with the First Nations Public Service as linkages for community gardens. That is an important topic, and I have seen resources. I just don't have them on hand to share at the moment.
We can share them out if you can share them with us after. And I'll let Anne, she had some comments to provide, I think.
I know the people I work with. I couldn't remember the name of their organization that we deal with. We've been making applications to the First Nation Food Security FNFC.ca, and we deal with JAMI. And we've been able to secure funding to help build a greenhouse, build a community garden. And we also have our high school that is doing their own garden, and they have an industrial sized greenhouse that they're building as well. So we've made application over the last few years. Our garden has grown quite a bit. The food's distributed to the elders and those that have disabilities, delivered right to their home when they do harvesting.
Great, thank you. So this question is directed specifically to Anne, but Janine, you might have an answer as well. They're wondering how community members were encouraged or supported in starting their own gardens. So how did you encourage that, Anne?
I love gardening myself, and where my garden sits, the community has to go by the garden anytime they're leaving from the dock. So we quite often there's two of us that have been gardening for about 10, 12 years now. And together we invite people to come out, and there have been others that have moved into the community and they share that same passion. So we're distributing harvesting from our own gardens, but the council is also behind it, where they've started the compost program in the community. This was before I even moved back into the village. The leadership had adopted how they're going to deal with the solid waste, and part of that was composting, with the vision of having a community garden. Or we're always reminded that our grandparents used to garden all the time as well. So there's nothing like fresh vegetables, fresh berries. So it took on a life of its own.
Absolutely. Janine, did you have anything to add? Did you do anything in your community to support individuals looking to?
No, I like what Anne said on it took us on a life of its own. The members that's what they love to do, and they just started to do their own little gardens. So it's really good to see that that's happening.
Thank you. I'm going to jump down to a question because there's a number about funding sources, which I'll get back to. But there was a question particularly for Anne and Janine. If your communities or nations have a food security coordinator, a staff position, I'm going to guess the answer is probably no, that help to develop food security programs and contribute to the emergency food response. If so, how crucial are these positions to advancing community food security goals? Janine, perhaps you can start with this one.
We don't have a food security position, and it's mainly been, a lot of the work has been working with myself and our community service team on getting everything that we needed for the COVID-19 and the food distribution. So it was a real full team effort of all the staff.
And I'm guessing the answer is no for your community as well.
We don't have somebody that's specific to that, but like I said, our deputy chief counselor is mandated to take care of local matters, and part of that is oversight and ensuring we have what we need locally.
Great team effort. I have a question here. Hi, I'm wondering if anyone has a good list of culturally appropriate emergency food supplies. for example, weekly or per person for planning purposes. And do you want to go ahead? Do you have any advice for Rochelle?
Well, because we're on the water, we're part of that is always having salmon or some kind of fish stored, whether it's frozen or canned salmon, smoked salmon, those types, and then the staples, the vegetables. A lot of people really enjoy their breads, their grains, color, foods of color, carrots, peppers. But we also had hunters in our community that went out and then brought their harvest home and distributed that as well, home to home, house to house. So we had people out hunting for deer and moose and elk, seals, so those types of things. That's what was appropriate for our community. And I know that we have people in the webinar from other provinces, and I wouldn't know what would be culturally appropriate for somebody in Alberta. So.
So please, if any of those individuals from those other areas want to add some comments to the chat, we can ship so all participants can see them. Go ahead. In the meantime, Janine, did you have anything you wanted to add to that about culturally?
Culturally appropriate, yet we have, it is also the fishing. We had our fishing crews go out and get some fish. We had some stock of elk meat that we distributed, and those are the types of food that our members really enjoyed, was our own food. And so that's what we worked on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Someone has commented that they recall several years ago there was pandemic preparedness programs initiated, and I think those are ongoing and through EMBC, FNHA, other sources. That's my commentary, not the question. So the question is, did your community have a specific plan to fall back on? Did you have a pandemic plan related to food security in place? And I'll turn that over perhaps to Janine to start, followed by Anne. But then the second question is maybe directed to Melissa. Is considering, or would you considering providing resources for this? So we could start with part one. Did you have a pandemic plan in place, Janine?
We had an emergency plan in place, and it was quite a few years ago, so not a lot of the staff knew what was in that plan, and it was bringing it back forward. And I think the other thing was Ditidaht was just getting ready to update their emergency plan before the COVID-19. It was in June and July of this year. We were having some incident command system training. And that is something that is really needed in the First Nations, because not a lot of people know that system that EMBC goes by.
And did your community have a pandemic plan?
We have a pandemic plan. We have an emergency plan that we work at updating as much biannually, if not annually. And it was make an application to ISC to be able to have the funding to do that project. So just, there are so many different factors that bring it together. And like I was saying, we made an application for the community garden. We made another application for other food harvesting, and always ensuring that we have the rainy day fund as well.
Fantastic.
So I know that there is funding for emergency preparedness, which includes planning for pandemics. And a lot of communities like Janine's and Anne's have put that into place and are using those plans right now. So if your community is interested in that, please get in touch with the emergency management team. And if you don't know who that is, you can always reach out to me and I will send you their contact information. So there is funding available to do that planning.
Great. Thank you. So there's a number of comments in the Q&A talking about funding sources. Someone has said that FNHA has some funding sources. I'm also going to just note for individuals, someone has commented that PAHO Pandemic Planning Workbook is a great resource for food security planning. I'm not familiar with that, but I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention here. There was a question, this is a little different than the traditional food methods. Someone is wondering what untraditional but effective methods or activities have come up during the crisis. Have you found any of those come up that have been particularly effective in your communities? Janine, perhaps I can pick your brain.
Anything untraditional? Not that I can think of. I think it was a lot of communication with the members at home and getting an actual list of what they needed. Especially with our elders, we would check on a weekly basis to see what they needed to bring, so we could bring that in for them and for the babies. So it's just making sure, you know, you had the essential needs, diapers, baby food, anything for the elders, insured drinks, things like that.
Absolutely. As the mother of a now preschooler, I remember the panic when you ran out of diapers. And in your community, is there anything come up that surprised you, that was untraditional or new?
The need for physical distancing, and because what we always talk about is the Ahousaht way. The Ahousaht way is to take care of each other. We have our 4 pillars, the Ahousaht, Ditidaht, and Ahousaht. And so how do we give life to that and enable having to do virtual gift cards for our urban members? That is untraditional, but we wanted to ensure that they could go out and secure some of the food or whatever they needed with these gift cards. So that happens. Like we said, we have a rainy day fund. Another branch has a rainy day fund, and we're helping coordinate that. That was different for us because we would have loved to be able to go door to door, but we can't do that.
That's been an issue for a number of things. I'm gonna ask another question. So we've talked a lot about growing and gathering the food. Question, where do you store the foods before they're distributed? Or do you usually distribute immediately for people and they process their own foods? Perhaps, Janine.
So Wednesday is our shopping day. We have a staff member.
Oh, Janine?
They get the full list, and then tonight they bring it back and we bag them and separate them and get them ready. We deliver to the elders that have requested it to be delivered, so that'll happen tomorrow. So it's a lot of using a lot of coolers, a lot of ice to keep things cold until we distribute tomorrow, Thursdays.
And how does your community deal with storage?
Because we have to buy things in bulk, what we've done is we've converted one of our office buildings into the food bank, and it already had freezers in there. It's been used as the fisheries office. So we also brought in fridges from other departments, and we've just converted that building. We've got air conditioner unit in there to keep things cool, and everything. Wednesday is delivery day. That's why Melinda wasn't able to do the presentation today. She's busy over there, and they break it up into smaller portions, and they get a sheet that has a list of all of the foods that are available. Before you go, you're given a pen, you check off, okay, I need some potatoes. There are 3 people in my house, so they'll take one, maybe you get 1 bag of potatoes. If there's 10 or 12 people, maybe you get 3 or 4 bags of potatoes. But to minimize contact, we have a tent that's set up outside. You hand your sheet in, and then you go to the next window and they give you back the food in crates. You put it in your own containers and you're on your way. everything that we needed to do to keep the physical distancing. And yeah, we tried to distribute as quickly as possible, but it takes about a day and a half because we have so many people in our community.
And can I ask who, are you buying the food from a supplier in Tofino or somewhere on the island, or are you having food donated to your food bank?
It's a combination of all of those. We order food from Cisco. You'd mentioned Cisco. And now with the restaurants opening, we know that they've already given Melinda the notice that our orders are going to be shifted down because their restaurants are that's their bread and butter, right? But Melinda's long-term thinking, she's been able to order things in bulk. So there's the foods that are, yeah, so we order from Cisco, we order from Tofino Co-op, we order from a couple of different butchers, meat suppliers, Circle Dairy, other whole foods, wholesale food places. And then Casco, which also provides for quality foods. There we are able to get the non-food items like the diapers, the personal supplies and such. And then she does special orders that we can purchase. So let's say I really like certain brand of coffee. And if she can, she'll order it in and she gets it in a case. So whatever is left over, that is sold. So there's two different windows that you go to. There's purchase window and there's the food distribution. So, and we keep track of everything. Everything is coded in our accounting system. So there's multiple parts to make this happen. So for the elders, our home support team from our social development take the list to the elders fill that in, they bring it back to the food bank, and the home support team will deliver the food right to the elders' home, generally to their porches. Yeah.
I'm wishing I had a picture of your setup. Maybe we can ask you to snap a shot and we can share it on our Facebook group after of the different portals or windows you have for the distribution.
We have, we're in all of this together on Facebook. I'll send you a link later on, but yeah.
Sure. And we'll make sure to share it with everyone who's on our webinar and our group. I'm going to go to another question because we have way more questions than time. And it alludes to something you were just talking about, Anne. Does anyone have a grocery list ready to share, or a pre-prepared list? And also, in the spirit of sharing, do either of you have food security plans that could be shared? Maybe Anne, I'll go back to you to start this one.
I can share with you the list because every week we have that list, but the actual order list, that's something I would get from Melinda, is she would have she said, for instance, we used to order 20 cases of eggs. Now we're ordering this many cases. So there's always that analysis of the quantity, how much are we actually going to order? And then the Nanaimo Food Bank actually donated some eggs to our community. We just had to make arrangements to have it picked up. So just keeping partnerships open, and that's really important because all of our nations have a municipality close by. So those are things that we do, is we work as well as we can with our partners out there.
Janine, do you have a list that you're using or food?
Oh, no, we don't have a list or a food plan. It's just been learning as we go, and we add things each week if there's something we miss. And I think the hardest thing has been to shop is to try to be different, but you just always end up getting the same things each week.
Again, as a mom, that's how I feel when I'm meal planning for the week.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to a question that came up in the chat right at the very beginning that I had skipped over. There was someone had shared their experience in their own community, and one of the questions that they had was dealing with their off-reserve membership. And you've talked about mailing gift cards and virtual gift cards and all those. They said there's very little funding available for off-reserve, and also, so if there's sources for that, Melissa, sources communities can tap into to support their urban membership. And then to Anne and Janine, more about how you're supporting your urban membership. So Melissa, maybe first to you.
Sure, I would say there are about 3 sources that I could think of. One is that the national and then local food banks under that have gotten the $100 million in funding from the federal government. So there's a lot more resources going to food banks. And I just know from Vancouver, we heard a report yesterday that the Vancouver Food Bank has more food than they know what to do with. So there's just been a large influx of food and funding. I'm not saying that's the case everywhere, absolutely not, but that is the kind of the most straightforward resource to get actual food if you are close to a food bank. And then the Aboriginal centers have also been providing food and meals and support. And I know that they've been maxed out, but I think they have received additional funding as well in response to COVID. So hopefully they can provide some support to First Nations or Indigenous people off reserve. And then, as Anne mentioned, a lot of First Nations have made a decision to support members off reserve through, either food baskets or gift cards, and that's some of them have chosen to use their Indigenous Community Support Fund funding to do that. So that's been at the discretion of Chief and Council, and we're not involved in those. So I would say those are the kind of 3 main avenues to support off reserve members with food security. And then actually I should mention, all of the national programs to support wage losses, such as the income supplements, the child tax benefit, the GST rebate, the rent support, all of that is to help people. And then also increases in income assistance rates in BC, is the idea is to help them get through this time without as much, detriment to their food and also, general life security as possible. So those are kind of the main supports that have been put into place.
Thank you, Melissa, for that. Janine, maybe we could flip to you. Do you have any particular comments about how you've been supporting your urban population or your off-reserve members?
The off-reserve number, that has been a difficult one to deal with because we actually have more members off-reserve than we do have on-reserve. And trying to let members know that the funding that we receive for the emergency funding is based on how many people are actually living on reserve, was how it was all calculated. We did the gift cards to the members, and we got that out as a one-time, and we were aware that there was some more funding that is did for the urban Indigenous, so we let them know to watch out to see where that money went. We said probably friendship centers or food banks, and so that's what we recommended that they go to for their other sources.
Great. And I know just from some of the communication with the friendship centers that they have been working around the clock and had a huge demand. So thank you, Hawa, to them as I have the opportunity here. And you've spoken a little bit about urban populations already. Did you have anything to add?
What we've done is we've made an application for some of that urban funding that's been available under CERB and through ISC. We're still waiting for a reply. We've been consistently advocating, our chief counselor has been consistently advocating for that application to have a response. But I lost my train of thought. What we've done with some of the Indigenous community support is we've hired an individual who's just recently graduated from university, and it's a short-term contract, and her title is communications and benefits advocate. So she's No matter where you are, if you're a Ahousaht member, and you'd like some assistance in making application to any of the programs that are support programs that have arisen out of COVID, whether it's provincial, regional, or national, you can give Sabrina a call and she'll help you with the application process. And she's working out of our EOC offices as well.
That's fantastic. And I was going to add that we had a session a couple of weeks ago, I think now, with some members from CRA and an individual from HealthSIC who had the similar position. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I know there are a ton of questions in the chat and in the Q&A that we haven't gotten to. And also, we've touched on a number of topics that I think have sparked other questions, at least in my mind, about helping, individuals apply for benefits and how you deal with your EOC and social distancing and a food bank and all of those pieces. I'm going to take a second to indicate that we are to talk again about our First Nation Administrators Network on Facebook. Please jump in. We will be encouraging our panelists, and I know that there have been contact in the chat from emergency management with ISK. People have been putting their contact information, FNHA resources, some links to agriculture. We'll try to post some of those, but I'd encourage any of you who have that type of information or best practices to share to please jump on and put them in. Part of the reason we started the mentorship initiative with FNPSS is because of this type of communication. Anytime we bring band administrators or leadership from communities together, the innovative and creative and important conversations that happen are just way better than anything we could plan or pre-produce with panels and speeches of experts. So I appreciate your time so much for sharing, and Janine, and of course Melissa, thank you for all the work you've been doing. I have a couple of other closing pieces. We'll share our website. We'll share around this recording. So please share with anyone else you'd like. We could potentially look at doing another topic. There is a survey that'll come up as we close. And one of the pieces on the survey, we appreciate your time telling us what you thought about this webinar, but one of the pieces will also be asking you what other topics you want us to cover. So please go ahead if this is something you want more discussion. And last but not least, we have heard from our advisory committee of band administrators that, again, sharing what other communities are doing and having an opportunity for these discussions is something they want us to do. So we take their direction pretty seriously. FNPSS is looking to organize a forum where band administrators can, we're gonna max out our technology ability, where they can hear from people who have been doing this in their community, both food security, health and wellness, reopening band offices, all of those topics. And then we'll try to facilitate breaking out into some smaller virtual breakout sessions where all of the good tips that individuals have been sharing in the chat, where they can share those with each other and report them out. So watch for that. And if you have input on what you'd like to see in a day like that, where you can talk to other band administrators from communities, please let us know. So again, thank you so much, Anne and Janine and Melissa. And all of your community, all of the people that I know are working behind you to ensure this happens in your communities. And to everyone else, please be safe. Have a wonderful day. And Hawa so much. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.